Emily Carter and Richard Carter shared a secret no one could imagine, a forbidden affair that would destroy their family and end in murder. Emily Carter had everything most people dream of: a loving husband, a comfortable home, and a life that looked picture-perfect from the outside. She and her husband, Daniel, lived in a quiet Texas suburb where every house looked the same and every neighbor waved with a smile. People often described them as the kind of couple who had it all. But behind their polished image, cracks had begun to form. Daniel's long work hours at a construction firm left Emily alone for days. The laughter and warmth that once filled their home had faded into routine silence. Emily would sit by the window each evening, watching the sunset and wondering if love was supposed to feel this empty. When Daniel's mother passed away unexpectedly, his father, Richard Carter, moved in with them. He was grieving but carried himself with surprising strength. He filled the house with stories from his past, his deep voice bringing life back into the rooms that had grown cold. Emily found comfort in his company, something Daniel had unknowingly stopped providing. Richard was kind, attentive, and charismatic in a way that made her feel seen again. He complimented her cooking, asked about her interests, and listened when she spoke. Soon, she began looking forward to his presence more than she wanted to admit. Daniel, exhausted and distracted, never noticed how close they were becoming. What began as harmless companionship started to change into something dangerous, a quiet tension that neither of them dared to acknowledge. Late at night, when the house was still and Daniel slept upstairs, Emily found herself thinking about Richard's gentle smile and the warmth in his eyes. It was a thought she tried to push away, but one that returned stronger every time. Something inside her was waking up, and she couldn't stop it. Richard Carter had a charm that drew people in without effort. His gray hair, neatly combed back, and his confident posture made him seem much younger than his age. Unlike Daniel, who was often too tired to talk, Richard enjoyed long conversations over morning coffee. He asked Emily about her dreams, her favorite books, and the things that made her happy. The attention felt intoxicating to her. For the first time in years, someone was truly listening. What began as simple gestures, helping her cook, sharing jokes, or fixing small things around the house, slowly turned into moments charged with emotion neither of them could ignore. Emily told herself it was harmless. She was only keeping Richard company while Daniel worked late. But deep down, she felt the growing connection between them. When Richard brushed against her arm while handing her a plate, her pulse quickened. When he complimented the color of her dress, she blushed like a teenager. She started dressing a little nicer, wearing perfume she hadn't used in years. It was wrong, and she knew it, but the loneliness inside her was stronger than her guilt. One afternoon, while sorting laundry, she found herself staring at the door of Richard's room. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. A part of her wanted to turn away, but another part wanted to walk in. Their eyes met in the hallway that day, both frozen by what they felt and feared. From that moment, the air between them changed. What had been comfort became temptation. A storm was building silently in that house, one that neither of them could stop, and one that would soon destroy everything they had left. The first time it happened, Emily told herself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness caused by grief and loneliness. But once that line had been crossed, there was no going back. The affair with Richard continued in silence, hidden behind smiles and family dinners that looked perfectly normal to anyone watching. They met when Daniel was away at work, stealing hours in the quiet of the afternoon. Every time they were together, Emily felt equal parts thrill and guilt. She hated herself for what she was doing, but she couldn't stop. Richard told her he hadn't felt alive since his wife's death, and Emily believed him. They convinced themselves that what they shared was love, even as it tore their lives apart. Months passed, and the guilt began to weigh heavier. Emily started waking up in the middle of the night, panicked that Daniel might find out. She became distant, distracted, and nervous around her husband. The smallest sound made her heart race. Then came the day that changed everything. When she realized she was pregnant, her world seemed to stop. The timing made it impossible to know if the baby belonged to Daniel or Richard. Fear took over her every thought. She tried to act normal, but her trembling hands and pale face didn't go unnoticed. Richard's excitement when she told him only made things worse. He spoke about running away together, starting a new life, but Emily couldn't bear the idea. She wanted to forget everything and pretend it never happened. What she didn't know was that trying to end it would ignite something dangerous inside Richard, something that would turn their secret into a deadly trap that no one would escape from alive. Emily could no longer carry the weight of what they'd done. The pregnancy had shattered whatever illusion of control she thought she had. Every time she looked at Daniel, guilt clawed at her chest. She avoided his touch, avoided his eyes, terrified he might sense the truth. When she finally told Richard she wanted to end things, she expected pain and sadness, but not the coldness that came over him. His expression hardened, his voice losing all warmth. He reminded her that he had sacrificed everything for her, that what they shared wasn't something she could just erase. Emily realized then that Richard's love had turned into an obsession. The phone calls began first, late at night, his voice whispering that he missed her. Then came the gifts left on her doorstep: flowers, jewelry, notes written in shaky handwriting. When she didn't answer his calls, he started showing up unexpectedly, pretending to be there for family reasons. Emily's heart pounded every time he entered the room. She felt trapped, afraid to tell Daniel the truth, but even more afraid of what Richard might do if she pushed him away too hard. One evening, she saw his car parked down the street, engine running, lights off. He sat there for hours, watching the house. That night, she locked every door and lay awake listening for footsteps. Her secret had turned into a nightmare she couldn't escape. Richard wasn't the gentle, grieving man she thought he was anymore. He was possessive, unpredictable, and dangerous. Emily knew she had to end it for good, but deep down, she feared that the only way Richard would ever let her go was if one of them stopped breathing. Daniel Carter had always trusted his wife. He believed in the life they had built together and never questioned her loyalty. But over the past few months, he began to notice small things that didn't make sense. Emily flinched when he touched her shoulder. She hid her phone when he entered the room. Sometimes, she would stare into space for minutes, lost in thoughts she couldn't explain. He tried to convince himself that it was just stress or maybe grief over his mother's death, but deep down, a whisper of suspicion began to grow. Then one afternoon, an envelope appeared in their mailbox. No name, no return address, just his. Inside were a few printed photos, blurry but undeniable. In them, Emily and his father were together in a hotel room, holding each other in ways that shattered Daniel's world. He sat in silence for hours, the pictures trembling in his hands. The betrayal ran deeper than anything he had ever imagined. It wasn't just infidelity. It was humiliation, a wound to his pride and his family. He didn't confront them right away. Instead, he hid the photos in his desk drawer and watched. Every smile, every look, every word between them became a piece of evidence in his mind. He began to follow their routines, noticing when they were alone, when Emily's expression changed. On the surface, Daniel appeared calm, but inside he was crumbling. The anger grew quietly, wrapping itself around his thoughts like a shadow. He started recording things, phone calls, text messages, even small movements in the house. Emily had no idea that Daniel knew everything. The man she once trusted was no longer just a husband. He had become a ticking time bomb, waiting for the perfect moment to explode. Rain fell steadily that evening, drumming softly on the roof as thunder rolled across the distance. Emily almost canceled dinner. Her nerves stretched too thin to face both men at once, but Daniel insisted they all eat together. He said he wanted to reconnect, to bring the family back together. His tone was gentle, his eyes calm, and that frightened her more than anything. The table was set neatly, candles flickering against the dark windows. Richard arrived with a bottle of wine, trying to act normal, but Emily could see the tension behind his smile. The air was thick, heavy with secrets no one dared to speak. They sat together, pretending to enjoy the meal, though every word felt rehearsed. Daniel poured the wine, speaking softly about forgiveness and family. Emily's hands trembled as she lifted her glass. The sound of rain grew louder, drowning out the silence between sentences. Police sirens echoed through the quiet neighborhood as flashing lights illuminated the Carter home. Officers rushed inside to find Daniel sitting on the kitchen floor, staring blankly at nothing. His hands were trembling, his shirt soaked in blood. When they questioned him, he spoke in a dazed monotone, claiming it was self-defense. He said Richard had attacked Emily in a jealous rage after she tried to end their affair. It was a story that, at first glance, seemed believable. The knife lay near Richard's body, and Emily's injuries appeared consistent with a violent struggle. But detectives quickly noticed that Daniel's version didn't match the evidence. There were no defensive wounds on Richard's hands, no signs of a fight near his body. The blood patterns on the floor suggested that the stabbing had been deliberate, not chaotic. A single strike to Richard's chest was clean and precise, too controlled for the panic Daniel described. Emily, barely conscious, could only whisper fragments of words as paramedics carried her away. None of them made sense at first, but one phrase stood out. He planned it. At the station, Daniel maintained his innocence, repeating that his father had lost control and that he had only acted to protect his wife. Yet detectives couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was hidden behind his calm exterior. When they searched his study, they found a locked drawer filled with old family photos, letters, and a small notebook. Inside, they discovered sketches of the family dinner table, drawn and redrawn, each page showing knives placed in different positions. It wasn't proof yet, but it was the first glimpse into a mind quietly constructing revenge under the mask of heartbreak. For weeks, investigators pieced together every fragment of evidence from the crime scene, and the puzzle slowly began to take shape. What emerged was a chilling picture of premeditation. Forensic experts confirmed that the anonymous letter Daniel claimed to have received was typed on his own laptop. The photos of Emily and Richard were digitally altered, composed from separate images taken months apart. He had created the illusion of betrayal long before the murder. His plan wasn't born in the heat of anger. It was carefully constructed, waiting for the right moment to unfold. Detectives also found deleted search histories on Daniel's computer, phrases like how to make a death look like self-defense and forging anonymous letters. It became clear that he had been plotting for months, letting resentment simmer until it consumed him. The dinner wasn't an act of reconciliation, it was a trap. He had chosen that night because the weather was perfect for covering noise, and the storm would wash away traces of what he planned to do. When confronted with the new evidence, Daniel's composure began to fracture. His voice shook, his explanations crumbled, and the calm facade he had maintained vanished. He confessed to writing the letter but denied killing with intent. He insisted that seeing Emily's affair drove him insane, that he only wanted to confront them, not kill anyone. But investigators knew the truth. His fingerprints were the only clear ones on the knife. The angle of the wound matched his dominant hand. Everything pointed to a deliberate act, not a moment of rage. The man who once appeared broken and heartbroken had revealed himself as something far more dangerous, a patient predator, hiding behind the mask of a betrayed husband. Emily spent weeks in the hospital, recovering from her injuries and the trauma of that night. When detectives finally questioned her, her face was pale, her voice soft, and her hands trembled as she spoke. She admitted to the affair, but insisted she never wanted harm to come to anyone. She said that Daniel's behavior had grown strange long before Richard's death, his mood shifting between affection and cold distance. He would stare at her for minutes without speaking, as if studying her. Sometimes she would wake up at night to find him sitting beside the bed, watching her sleep. She had believed his silence was heartbreak, but now she realized it was calculation. The case quickly became a sensation in the small Texas town. Reporters crowded outside the courthouse, and neighbors who once called Daniel a devoted husband now whispered about his temper and obsessive nature. In court, prosecutors described him as a man consumed by betrayal, slowly driven to madness. They showed the forged photos, the staged letter, and the dinner plan written in his notebook. The defense painted him as a victim of emotional collapse, claiming his actions were the result of unbearable humiliation and shock. Emily's testimony was the most haunting moment of the trial. She spoke through tears, describing the guilt she carried and the horror of that night, the moment Daniel smiled before the knife came down. The courtroom fell silent as her words echoed off the walls. When she said, "He wasn't crying when he did it," the jury's faces hardened. The story that began as an affair had turned into something far darker, a tale not of passion and regret, but of control, manipulation, and the slow birth of a killer hiding in plain sight. The trial ended with Daniel being found guilty of second-degree murder, and the sentence was life in prison without parole. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as reporters called out for Emily, but she had vanished. She left the town quietly, taking the child she carried with her, determined to start over under a new identity. No one knew exactly where she went, and even her closest friends speculated endlessly about her whereabouts. The scandal that had rocked the small suburb slowly faded from headlines, but whispers never fully disappeared. Emily raised her child far from Texas, in a city where no one knew the family history. She kept the past buried, never speaking of the father, never letting the child see old photos, and avoiding any reminders of what had happened. Yet sometimes, she would catch herself staring at the baby's eyes, wondering, terrified, if they held a resemblance to the man who had caused so much pain. The question of the child's paternity remained a secret that would never be answered publicly. Years later, a nurse who helped care for Emily after the birth claimed she overheard a whispered confession. "He looks just like his grandfather." The words were fleeting, almost impossible to verify, but they reignited the memory of the scandal. The story of betrayal, obsession, and murder that had shattered one family's life continued to haunt those who remembered it. Daniel would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Richard's death remained a warning of how quickly trust could be destroyed, and Emily lived in constant vigilance, carrying a secret that could never be told. The affair that started with stolen glances and forbidden desire ended in a murder, but the real tragedy was the shadow it left, one that lingered long after the headlines faded and the trial was over.